we're good there. And then let me type in Facebook Live. Come listen to the first chapter of my new book coming out this week. Yay! Add title to this live broadcast. Why? Share on your timeline. Yes. I'm not doing the interactive thing. That was stupid. Okay, I'm going live. All right. Let's give it a second. Yeah. Is it live? Okay, cool. All right. Did you get an alert? No? All right. Well, it'll come up. What's up, everyone? Anthony here. I'm with my best friends, Xavier and Ruby. They're actually my number one fans from day one. Day one, number one fans here for the reading. So if you don't know what the heck's going on, why I'm even going live, I'm going to read the first chapter of my new book. I wrote a book probably 2 years ago, and that was good. I wrote it pretty quickly, and then for no other reason, just to write it for myself. And that's honestly why I write, and I'm not going to make a ton of money off of these things. I don't really care. I'm more so writing to kind of catch up to where I'm at in my life and get my thoughts collected. And so that's a lot of the reason what this next book is. It's called The Millennial Vision, and the subtitle is Why We Need the Meek. So I dive into what really is that word, the meek. Well, you guys have probably all heard that word. There's the famous saying and verse and teaching by Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, the meek shall inherit the earth. And I think that's commonly not taught correctly, the true definition and interpretation of that word. So I dive into that with the book. And then also kind of try to tackle how we're supposed to move forward in the next millennium. So that's why it's called the Millennial Vision. I'm not talking about millennials per se, that generation of people, which I am actually a part. I think you guys are a part of too. We're like right on the last cusp of the end of millennials, and then right, I think a couple years after you, the beginning of Gen Z or iGen. Yeah, whatever they started. So it's more so it's called the Millennial Vision because we're talking about what kind of vision and what kind of stance and posture do we need to have as we move forward to this next millennium. So, with that preface, I'm going to begin reading chapter 1 of the Millennial Vision. How did we get here is the title of this chapter. All right. How did we get here? I think that's always a good question to ask of yourself and others involved, regardless of whether times are going well or not. A respectable view of the past and its history is something I believe we are losing each day. I mean that in the general sense, but also in an individual sense as well. I talk with people every day that are oftentimes too afraid, lazy, or self-centered to look back into the web of their own past and possibly understand the causes for the issues they are currently facing. Those that consider their lives to be heading in a positive direction may not take the time to slow down and meditate on how they got there or what brought them to this stage. Now, I'm going to do a bit of surfing through the past, but not solely for selfish reasons. I'm doing it to show you, the reader, and those watching, how I got to this subject in the first place and why it is so important to me. For some time now, I've been fascinated with the inward, in quotes, the psychological and spiritual mysteries that reside in each and every one of us. I do not know where this attraction came from, but if I think about it long enough, it may have come from my passion for writing films. I'm a filmmaker, and I always try to make films that capture an audience with emotional connection in hopes to bring them to an enlightening moral lesson, or just leave them with a sense of asking or wondering. I've always marveled at the films that made me asking and wondering as I watched the credits roll, and I've always sought to bring about the same conclusion in my art. I think it is in this seeking that I at some point realized that to make a person feel, you have to understand feeling and understand people. This brought me to the rabbit hole that seems to have led to that understanding. I call it a rabbit hole because it seems as if it will never end. I now assume some of you more scientifically rationalized, factual-based types will start to falter here as it seems I'm going down one of those paths, full of mumbo-jumbo quackery. Indeed, I may continue with some sense of quackery. I would call it more metaphysical, mystical, or existential, but only where fact leads us to a dip or a dead end in the road. We must look at the invisible realities residing in life to attempt to gather some sort of answer and movement forward. I think some of the writers I love most, some psychologists, some professors, all had to do this at some point. They look at the life around them and the experiences they've lived and are able to deduce answers for what seems to be happening. This is what I will partake in going forward. I do not always have the answers, and let me admit that up front. And I have not lived a terribly large amount of life at the time of this writing, but I am watching and listening and trying to learn from not only what I have faced thus far, but what I am facing and what people in my life are facing. There is at least some metaphorical truth in that, enough for me to try and figure this out. I hope you'll try to figure it out with me. In fact, I invite you to do so. There is also the understanding that even where I lack, I am not alone going forward, and neither are you. We stand today on the shoulders of giants. Beyond this, there is still the fact that some great thinkers of science, despite their research of the brain and its chemistry or writing, seem to come at a fork in the road. That fork is between the realization that there is the biological brain, tangible and even touchable, literal and metaphorical, but there is something beyond it that they can't grasp at all. Thought, consciousness, and the mind. Wilder Penfield, a once world-famous neurologist and brain surgeon, published a book that would be a summary of all his findings called The Mystery of the Mind. In it, Penfield said, quote, "Throughout my own scientific career, I, like other scientists, have struggled to prove that the brain accounts for the mind. But now, perhaps the time has come when we may profitably consider the evidence as it stands and ask the question, do brain mechanisms account for the mind? Can the mind be explained by what is now known about the brain? If not, which is the more reasonable of the two possible hypotheses, that man's being is based on one element or on two? It is my intuition that there is something beyond scientific rationalism that is left behind because it was hard to grasp, nigh impossible to. It is also my intuition that it is because things like consciousness and self-awareness are not things that science can logically pin down. That's where existential knowledge, learned through experience and inward intuition, comes into play. In fact, in my own life, since making that realization of the need to understand the art of just being a human and the emotions we feel, I've felt as if I've been caught up in a great mystery that leaves behind breadcrumbs that always leads me to the next inevitable step. It's as if someone or something is leading me along. I could be crazy, but just when I write it off as such, I'll hear an author speak about a truth or a thought I held dear to myself and didn't tell anyone, or read something that leads me to think I've found an answer to my questions. Walking through the bookstore, I'll stumble upon a book with the title reading the very answer I thought about days or weeks ago. Maybe it's not someone leading me along, but me following in the footsteps of those who have trekked the path before me. I think this could be true to an extent, but sometimes the pattern or the road is very sporadic and crosses over many genres and mediums. Jung would call it synchronicity. Regardless, it has all led me to this topic. All my reading and thinking and asking has consistently led me back to chivalry. I think it started with the present. I began hearing about the troubles of our youth on college campuses in America, and that led me to The Coddling of the American Mind by one of my favorites, Jonathan Haidt, and his co-author, Greg Lukianoff. That book opened my eyes immediately and made me realize that, statistically, iGen, the generation of people born after 1995, and the first generation to grow up with iPhones and other technologies connected to the vast internet, were drastically becoming more and more depressed and anxious. I didn't really care about this revelation, though, until I started teaching film this year at a high school in inner city Dallas, Texas. It was through teaching that I got to see that what I was reading by Haidt and Lukianoff was practical and was real. While teaching, by no purposeful effort of my own, some of my students began opening up to me about the battles they face and the struggles they all have. I always tried to be a good listener, and through listening found that indeed the students I have are depressed and anxious for the most part. They are looking at life and feeling as if they are purposeless, valueless, and have no meaning or part to play in this narrative. They are more connected than ever to not only people but information, yet feel so lonely. You could say they are lost without a map. Alongside teaching, I've also been a football coach for a few years, and it's the coach in me that always tries to pick people up and boost their confidence in themselves. It's partially because of this natural reaction that I research these things. I want to be able to efficiently help those students, or anyone for that matter, in those times where they are down. Actually, it's my intuition that it isn't just our youth that are feeling this way. I've criticized myself by implying that maybe what these kids are going through is just the plight of a teenager, but I don't think that's completely true. I look at my own life. I have friends my age and family members that are older than me that also feel this way and also think these things. I know that doesn't necessarily correlate to the whole of a nation or a people, but the more people I talk to about this, the more it seems to be prevalent. I think we all possibly battle with these thoughts and ideas in small ways or fashions in spurts, small doses at a time in various situations. but some of us battle these things every day. This realization led me to look externally at the world, and for reasons I'll touch on later in the book, made me believe that these feelings of depression and anxiety were because we are living in a vacuum. It's a vacuum that hasn't always existed and was, whether consciously or subconsciously, created by the acts of a few. It's a vacuum of dignity, of value, and of morals. Again, I'll touch more on this subject later, but this unearthed in me a fascination with morality and where it came from and what it is exactly. I read some of the classics such as Aristotle, Plato, and his writing of Socrates. Through my research, I found lacking for modern context on the subject. Despite this, wandering through the bookstore one day, I saw in front of me The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. I recognized the name and immediately picked it up. This book is amazing and a must-read for everyone. In it, Haidt, a social psychologist with an emphasis on morality, explains how through studies of his own psychological work has found that humans think we are reasoning beasts and assume the thought comes before the emotion. Haidt says it's the other way around. He shows throughout The Righteous Mind that it is actually the intuitive emotions pre-wired, not hardwired, inside of us that influence our moral decision-making, and that post hoc a choice, we reason why we made the choice. This thought alone was able to change my perspective. I felt I had found a major clue, but was only closer to the solution, not fully there. I was searching online for anything to do with morals and morality and just wasn't satisfied at all with what I was finding until I stumbled on some videos of C.S. Lewis's essays. His essay on equality was one I had to watch 3 or 4 times to fully grasp it, but I knew from the first minute that I had found the next clue. I grew up with Lewis in the house. I read about the adventures that happened in Narnia, and my mother and brother loved his work. But despite this, in my youth I couldn't grasp most of his serious essays, and I would argue that I hardly grasp them now in adulthood, alongside most others. After stumbling upon the equality essay, I was led to buy some of Lewis's completed works, and included in those was Mere Christianity and the Abolition of Man. Again, I'll touch on these books and the treasures I found inside of them later, but after reading them I realized they held findings that tied into Haidt's findings and the other things I was reading. Lewis's books were written mostly in and around the 1950s, yet he was prophetically coming to conclusions on psychology and morality then that Haidt was able to prove scientifically now. Then there was the night I was listening to a podcast and someone mentioned Francis Fukuyama's new book on identity. I was interested, so I found it and bought it. Once I started reading it, I knew it was another step on the right path, as the verbiage and aim was right along what I had been following. All in all, there's probably been a couple other podcasts, talks, books, and people that have led me to where I am today, and I'm thankful for all of them. Thankful that they gave answers that led me to more questions. I look at life in general, but especially my interest in morality, psychology, and human value, as a great mysterious game that will never end. It is the best game for that reason. I find joy that it will never end, and that I can have small victories here and there, but the hunt continues. And that hunt has found a temporary rest here in this book. I have a couple aims to achieve in my writings, all under one banner, but really this book is also somewhat of a summary of where my headspace and mind is at currently. I do this with hopes that I can help the reader feel the strength and courage that is already inside of you, to face the fight that is human life, with a smile on your face. That has become a passion of mine, helping you and whoever needs it realize that the answers are all inside of you, and that you can be the hero of your stories, your family, your culture, and your world. So often, the more I grow up and learn, I think it really is an act of art to live as a human and do it somewhat well. But in modern educational systems, we're really not helped all that much on how best to be human, are we? We are never handed sufficient and accurate maps for life. The biggest aim of this book is to examine some of what's going on in my life around me and offer up a roadmap through life. My goal is to live as one who not only hopes to make my own life a little better, but the life of others as well, and leave things a little bit better than how they were handed to me. As mentioned before, I don't assume to have everything figured out, and these thoughts are an experiment to attempt to answer a hypothesis. This hypothesis may result in a form of living that helps us move through life with higher aims. I'm writing this book not only to synthesize my thoughts so far and present an idea, but to also hopefully define clearly and understandably what is meekness and how it can be achieved and how it can be lived via neo-chivalry, as I define that term. After defining it and sketching out its boundaries, I hope to explain why we need it today. Once that explaining is done, I wish to explore how we can all embody the neo-chivalric code today and for the rest of our lives along the way. Show what neo-chivalry looks like in today's world. At the end of it, I hope you will realize the necessity of chivalry's revival, and that it is the water to the lonely lost desert wanderer that is our culture today. All right, so that's the first chapter. I was basically just setting the scene for where I go. There's the book's only 71 pages, and I kind of gave you a brief introduction to some of the books that have influenced me so far, some of the knowledge and the research that I've done to get to this point with chivalry and morality and the meek. So I hope for those that have watched the whole thing, hopefully it piqued your interest to try and buy it and go on further. I think eventually I'll post me reading all of the chapters on my YouTube. So that's something to look out. Once the book's been out for a while, I'll probably post that, and that way it can be like kind of like an audio version of it for people that don't really like to read. But those who don't like to read, I will encourage you that it is only about 72 pages long, so you could probably knock it out in an hour if you really sat down and wanted to. But essentially, yeah, guys, I don't know if any of that made sense, but where I'm going with this is I think that I really think there's a recurring pattern of a lack of, well, especially with our youth, but I really don't think it's just the youth now. I think there's a lot of people suffering from this, but the pattern is a lack in sight for purpose, for value, for meaning, and what people are supposed to do with their lives. And so, well, I have theories and I have hypotheses as to where and why that happened. The largest one being, I think this change happened. I think what we're seeing is the long-term consequences of the Enlightenment. That's commonly looked back in history as like such a positive thing, but the Enlightenment and really the scientific revolution hurt us, and it put a cap on our reality. And when we went through that period, the cap that we put on our reality was, hey, everything that we can't explain rationally with logic and with science, it fits underneath the cap. But everything that we can't explain with those things fits underneath the cap. Everything we can't is above that cap on our reality, and we don't need it. There's no necessity for it. But the problem with that is it left out things like meaning and value and spirituality, things that are transcendental to the physical world around us. And so I find it no coincidence that when that happened and it cut off those things from our worldview, that we're now suffering from a lack of those things today, and modern man is. So I think there's a connection there. I think us suffering from those things now is a long-term consequence of that change during the Enlightenment, during the scientific revolution. And so if we follow that line of thought, we can go back and look prior to that time and really around that time as it was changing, right around the 11th and 12th century, and kind of reclaim some lost vision. I think that's maybe why I called this book The Millennial Vision, because it's like a revisioning of our worldview. And that's an attempt to try and get us to look back and see through the eyes of some of our more ancient ancestors. And that's another fight, I guess, that I need to realize, is that a lot of people, we grow up being taught historically that, in a Darwinian sense, right? Darwin had survival of the fittest, and we've kind of constantly been evolving to get better. We're all kind of subconsciously hypnotized by that worldview, and in a lot of ways, I think that's wrong. I think history is cyclical. I don't think it's a linear, like an exponentially growing, upward sliding scale of evolution. I think it's cyclical. I think it goes in waves, and it goes in ups and downs, and it goes in cycles. And when you look at history that way, you realize, these our ancient ancestors were not dumb. And I think in a lot of ways, the more you learn about it, they were probably more advanced than us in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to the mind, the interconnectivity between the mind and the body, psychology, spirituality, and then especially they were more advanced than us in terms of how we looked at the world and our relationship with the world around us, and as humans and nature interacting. So all that to be said, this is essentially where I go with the book. It's really just kind of a dip in our toes, and really I'm trying to tackle some of the issues that I see occurring in the kids today, and really not just kids. Like I said, I think it's happening in a lot of people with this lack of meaning, a lack of purpose, and a lack of value. And I think the value thing is the most important, and I touch on it in chapter 3, I think. Let me see. Chapter 2 is defining chivalry. So I start off by opening up with chivalry and talking about the misconceptions there. I give you the history of the word itself, the etymological history of that word, and then kind of how it died down and dissipated into becoming what people think of it as today. I said something today at work about chivalry, and someone's like, "Oh, so we need to open more doors for people. We need to hold more doors open." It's like there's so much more to that word than just that. Like it's seriously, and that's okay. Like that just shows you how much that word has been, how much that word is just a skeleton of what it once was. And so we can try to reclaim that word again. So I start there. And that's really what I meant in the first chapter by neo-chivalry, neo meaning new. I think it's time for a new chivalry and a new chivalric code. So that's that. And that's not assigned to any gender. You can be male, female, and whatever you want to be and still be chivalric when you understand the true meaning of it. And you can still be meek and see the ties that those two have together. So that's a place I go with the book. But it's chapter 3. It's called The Desert of the Real. And that's probably my favorite chapter. And I can't wait till I get to read that and share that with you. But that's really where I think the meat and bones of the meat and potatoes and all the good old stuff of this book is at. Because this whole problem with value, that we see and meaning in our lives is, I really think, due to, I really think it's due, and coming back to the scientific enlightenment and the scientific revolution, we split the subjective and the objective world. And subjective, what I mean by that is like solely what's going on inside your head and through your eyes. By objective, I mean everything outside of that, everything external, and everything non-individual. And so at this, Descartes, I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but he was a French mathematician and philosopher, famous for saying, "I think, therefore I am." If you haven't heard of Descartes, you've probably heard that saying, "I think, therefore I am." And Descartes really was the one that originated this split, I think, subconsciously. I don't think he meant to do it by any means, and I don't think we even knew what had happened when he said that and when we widely accepted it. But by saying, "I think, therefore I am," he was claiming that me and you, as rational, logical creatures that think, because we think, that is the only thing that's really, truly true and provable. So he was basically saying, and it was a worldview that's, I think, hypnotized all of us, that he was basically saying the subjective worldview is the only truth. And that's not the case. The more you study reality, and the more you study the disconnect we're feeling now in modern times, that's actually half the picture, and maybe not even half. There has to be an objective reality. There has to be an objective worldview and an objective value. So, The Desert of the Real, chapter 3. That's just a little intro to that. That's where I go with that, and I think that's really the heart of the issue here with our lack of value, a lack of purpose, and a lack of meaning in our lives today. And a lot of the issues we see going on politically, through education, and socially, I think, deal with this. So anyway, that being said, people that are joined, I appreciate you stopping by and watching. If you missed me reading the first chapter, go back, check it out. Let me know what you thought, comment. Let me know if you have questions, and then you guys be checking out the book when it comes out. I gave it to Amazon today. They said it at most would take 72 hours to go live on Amazon, where you guys can buy it there. I'm also going to have physical copies, so if you guys want to buy them off of me when you see me, that's fine too. Otherwise, you can buy it. It's going to be on Amazon for $10 as of right now, and there will be a Kindle version that will probably be cheaper, and you can do that as well too. And then, like I said earlier in the video, I'm going to probably start, after a couple weeks of it being out, I'll probably start reading and recording more of an audio version of it, just like this, for each chapter, and posting those to my YouTube as like a little YouTube series that you guys can check out as well. The book, again, is only 72 pages, if that. So I highly encourage you to check it out and read it. You could probably knock out an hour, and I'd love to talk to you about it. That's the main reason why I write this stuff, is just to get my thoughts out there, but also to have conversations about it and try to see if I can't get closer to figuring this whole thing out. You guys have any comments? X and Ruby, my number one fans. You guys, they entered a sweepstakes raffle to try and be here today, and they won. So they got the. I'm kidding. Yeah, there was only 2 raffle tickets, and I pulled out both of theirs. So that was good. Aunt Missy, thank you. I see your comment. I appreciate that. And Carolyn, thank you. Jay, I see you, man. Appreciate you joining, stopping by. Busy guy, man. Everybody else, thank you for joining. And I will see you guys soon. Appreciate it.